Wyoming Territory. Early spring of 1881, snow still clung to the north-facing hills outside Buffalo, but the thaw had begun, and with it came the sound of hooves that had not passed through these parts in a long while. Zadie Orwood saw the rider before the dust. He came from the west, sun behind him, coat flapping open with the wind, his hat low and his horse carrying the weight of someone who had not stopped moving in a long time. She stepped off the porch of the small cabin, a hand on the doorframe, the other shielding her eyes. Inside, her daughter didn't look up. "Bess," Zadie said gently, "there's someone coming." The girl didn't answer. She sat on the floor by the hearth, her fingers working a carving knife slowly over a bit of pine. Nearly 12, and she had never smiled at a man, not once. Not even the doctor who set her wrist last fall. Not the preacher. Not the traveling trader who'd brought her a tin whistle. Not after what her father had done. Zadie's jaw tightened. She stepped off the porch and walked toward the fence line where the rider was already slowing. He pulled up his horse and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "name's Boone O'Connor. I'm looking for work or a place to sleep, if not that." Zadie crossed her arms. "We don't have much here. I can fix things. Chop wood, mend fence. I'm decent with horses." "Not looking for charity." She studied him. His face was worn but not harsh. Wind-burned skin, soft eyes. Maybe 30, maybe a little older. She hesitated. "You got anyone after you?" she asked. "No, ma'am." "You drink?" "No." Zadie nodded once. "You can sleep in the barn. I'll bring food out." He dismounted without another word. That night, after Bess had gone to bed, Zadie carried a plate of beans and cornbread to the barn. Boone was sitting by a small fire near the stall, his saddle blanket rolled tight beneath him. She handed him the plate. He nodded. "Thank you." Zadie lingered. "You said you're not running, so why are you riding?" He glanced at the fire. "Lost my brother to a fever last winter, had a share in a place down near Rawlins. I could not stay after that." Something in his voice made her pause. He was not pretending. She could feel it, that quiet kind of grief that didn't need to be explained. "I lost my husband 2 years ago," she said. Boone looked up. "Sorry to hear that." She nodded once and turned to go. Over the next 2 weeks, Boone fixed the back fence, patched the chicken coop, and restrung the clothesline. He never asked for more than what she gave. He spoke to Bess, gently, every time he passed her. "Morning, Bess. That's a fine carving. You like the snow?" She never responded. Never looked up. But Zadie noticed something. Bess did not retreat from him either. She stayed in the same room when he came inside to eat. She even left one of her wood carvings on the step of the barn one morning. A small pony, rough but sweet. Boone brought it in that night. "She made this?" he asked. Zadie nodded. "That was her father's knife she's using." Boone turned the carving in his hands. "She's got a good hand." Zadie looked at the fire. He was not a good man. Boone said nothing. He set the carving down gently on the mantel and turned back to his plate. The next day, Boone found Bess sitting behind the barn watching the creek. He did not speak. He just sat near her, far enough not to crowd. She did not move. After a long time, she held up a small piece of wood. He took it. It was a horse again, but this one had more detail. She had carved a tiny saddle. "Thank you," he said. When he looked up, she was watching him. Her face was still, but something in her eyes had softened. Boone smiled. "I'm not going anywhere, Bess." Her lips twitched, slight, barely there, but it was a smile, a real one. Zadie saw it from the corner of the barn and froze. That night, she poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Boone as he sat on the porch. The stars were out, clear and sharp above the trees. "She smiled at you," Zadie said quietly. Boone looked down into his cup, then out at the dark. "I saw. She never has, not at a man." Boone didn't say anything for a moment, then he looked at her. "I meant what I said. I am not going anywhere." Zadie's heart beat a little faster. She looked down, then back at him. "You do not know what this land costs." "I do," he said. "I have lost things too." The silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was full of something slow and steady, like roots taking hold. She stood after a while. "You will need another blanket in the barn. It will snow again tonight." "Thank you, Zadie." She nodded, but her chest felt warm. The next day, Boone helped Bess feed the chickens. She handed him a pail without being asked. Later, she sat beside him on the porch steps while he sharpened a tool. Zadie watched them from the kitchen window, her hands still in the dishwater. That night, Boone knocked on the doorframe before stepping into the cabin. "I want to build her a bench," he said, "for her carving. She deserves something better than sitting on the floor." Zadie nodded. "She would like that." Their eyes met. Neither of them looked away. The bench was finished by the next week. Boone painted a tiny horse on the side. Bess ran her fingers over it and smiled again, broad this time, proud. Zadie had to turn away to hide the way her throat tightened. Boone saw. He stepped up beside her on the porch. "She is a good girl, she is," Zadie said. "I just wanted her to feel safe again." "You did that," Boone said. She looked up at him. "No, you did." He did not touch her, not yet. But his eyes were steady, and they made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. That night, as she lay in bed, Zadie stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind move across the land. She thought of Boone's voice, of how Bess had smiled at him, of how, for the first time in a long while, the cabin did not feel heavy with the past. It felt like a beginning. By mid-April, the snowmelt had run down into the creek, swollen and loud with thaw. The land was beginning to soften. Wild onions pushed up through the packed earth beside the barn, and meadowlarks had returned to the fence posts. Boone was splitting logs behind the shed when Bess came to stand near him. She didn't say anything, just watched the axe rise and fall, her arms wrapped around the carving she'd been working on since dawn. Zadie stood at the kitchen table, rolling biscuit dough, watching them through the open window. The air smelled of damp pine and wood smoke. She hadn't heard Bess speak a full sentence since the night her husband was buried. But now, her daughter sat beside Boone as he whet the blade. And though the words were too soft to catch, Zadie saw the rhythm of conversation beginning slow, stilted, but real. Later, Boone stepped into the cabin, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "She asked if I'd ever broken a bone," he said, voice low. Zadie paused, one hand on the kettle, the other on her hip. "And? I told her about falling from a mule when I was 12. Cracked my arm clean through." Zadie's mouth curved, but she didn't smile all the way. "She asked you something." "She did." He stepped aside so the door could close behind him. The kettle began to whistle. "She hasn't asked a single question since before," she said, pouring water over the leaves in the teapot. Her voice was steady, but her hands moved slower than usual. Boone turned the cup she handed him, watching the steam rise. "She's beginning to come up from under it." Zadie leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "You've got a way of easing things without pressing on them. I just sit still long enough." She looked at him, head tilted slightly. "You ever think about going back south?" He didn't answer right away. "There's nothing waiting for me there." Zadie nodded once. "Same here." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. They stood there with the tea cooling between them. And for the first time since she'd buried her husband, Zadie did not feel the need to fill a room with sounds just to keep it from closing in. A few days later, a wagon came up the ridge from town. It was Ledlow, the older rancher who lived 3 miles east, bringing nails and seed potatoes. He always asked too many questions, always lingered too long. Boone was fixing the hinge on the smokehouse when he spotted the wagon and came around front, wiping his hands on a rag. Ledlow climbed down slow, one boot at a time. "Zadie," he called, "I brought that sack you asked for." She stepped out, apron dusted with flour. "Appreciate it." The man's eyes flicked to Boone, then back to her. "Didn't know you had a hand around." Boone met his gaze but said nothing. Ledlow's eyes lingered too long. Zadie took the sack, holding it close to her hip. "You can leave the rest by the fence." Ledlow spat into the dirt. "You ought to be careful who you let sleep in your barn." "I ain't asked your counsel," she said evenly. Boone didn't move. He didn't need to. Ledlow muttered something and drove off without another word. That evening, Zadie found Boone sitting on the porch rail, oiling the axe handle. She stepped up beside him, the hem of her skirt brushing his boot. "You didn't have to come out front," she said. He turned the handle in his hand, checking for splinters. "I wasn't gonna let him talk to you like that. I can take care of myself." "I know," he said, "but I'm here." She looked out across the field where the last light touched the tops of the cottonwoods. "He's not the first who's warned me about what people will say. Let them talk." Zadie's fingers curled around the edge of the porch post. "I only care about what's true." Boone set the axe aside. "Then let me say it plain. I feel something here with you, with Bess. It's not something I came looking for, but it's something I'd stay for." Her throat tightened. She didn't speak right away. Then slowly she reached out and took the oil rag from his hand. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "I do," he said. "I build a place here. I keep fixing what needs fixing. I show her, both of you, that I mean what I said." Zadie looked at him, the last of the daylight catching the side of his face. "Then start with the gate. It's been dragging since last fall." He smiled just a little and stood. By the time the moon rose, Boone had fixed the latch, and Bess had left another carving on the porch. This one was a man on horseback, the reins carved with more care than she'd ever shown before. Zadie picked it up and held it in her palm. Boone stood beside her, the night cool on their faces. "She sees you," she said. "I see her," he answered. And she believed him. The wind shifted in late April. It blew from the south now, warmer, carrying the scent of turned soil and wild sage. Zadie hung linens on the line behind the cabin while Boone laid stones around the base of the new garden plot. Bess sat cross-legged nearby, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, her face calm. "You ever grow squash?" Boone asked without looking up. Zadie shook out a sheet. "Not since before she was born. Didn't have the space with the old shed in the way." He brushed dust from his palms. "This'll be good ground. You'll have more than enough come harvest." Zadie pinned the edge of the sheet and stepped back. "That's the first time you've said you instead of we." He straightened slowly, eyes meeting hers under the wide brim of his hat. "Didn't mean it that way." "I know," she said, softer now, "just noticing." Bess stood and wandered toward the edge of the creek. She'd taken to spending time there, building tiny bridges from sticks and pebbles. The sound of the water had a way of calming her. Zadie watched her go but didn't follow. "She's sleeping better," Boone said, voice low. Zadie nodded. "Started humming before bed." "She used to do that when she was little." He stepped closer, not quite touching her. "Do you think she'd want a dog?" Zadie turned to him. "Why?" "There's a litter down at the post. Ranch mutts. One of them's a runt, but he's got a good eye to him. I thought if she had something to care for, something hers might help." Zadie folded her arms. "You'd bring him here, if you say yes." She looked toward the creek. Bess had paused, crouched beside the bank, her face turned into the sun. "She's never had anything of her own." Boone took off his hat and held it loosely in both hands. "Then maybe it's time." 2 days later, he came back from town with a pale, furred pup wrapped in a grain sack. No more than a handful, ears too big for his head and a tail that wagged like it had a mind of its own. Bess knelt in the dirt when Boone set the bundle in front of her. The pup tumbled out and licked her fingers. She didn't laugh, but her shoulders relaxed and she whispered something too quiet to catch. Then she looked up at Boone and nodded once. He crouched beside her. "He's yours. You name him." She blinked slowly, then touched the pup's ear. "Dust." Zadie stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. "That's a good name." Boone stood and turned toward her. "You okay with this?" She looked down at Bess and Dust curled together in the grass. "I'm more than okay." That night, after supper, Boone stayed longer than usual. The lantern flickered low on the table, casting soft shadows across the walls. Zadie poured hot water over dried mint leaves and handed him a cup. He wrapped his hands around it. "I saw a parcel of land near the ridge, east side, flat enough to build something small." "It's not claimed." Zadie's brow lifted. "You thinking of putting down something more permanent?" "I'm thinking I don't want to keep saying goodbye every night." Her breath caught in her throat, then settled. "That land's dry. You'd need to haul water." "I'd do it." She leaned against the edge of the table. "You'd live that close?" "I'd live closer if you'd let me." The room went still. Behind them, Bess turned pages in one of the old almanacs by the fire, the pup snoring softly beside her. Zadie looked down at her hands. "I haven't let anyone near in a long time." Boone stepped forward, slow. "I know, but I'm not other men." She met his eyes. "No, you're not." He reached for her hand, not fast, just enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His fingers were calloused, warm, sure. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said. Zadie's voice was quiet. "I think I already have." The fire snapped. The wind brushed the shutters. Boone leaned in, touched his forehead to hers, and stood like that for a long moment, neither of them moving. Outside, the sky stretched clean and wide and full of stars. The kind of sky that made a person believe in new things. By early May, the wind had dried the fields enough for planting. Zadie worked the soil in long, quiet rows while Boone returned from the ridge with a borrowed plowshare and a promise from a neighbor to lend a mule. Bess trailed behind her mother, dropping onion sets and beans, Dust never far from her heels. The pup had grown into his legs but still tumbled over them when he ran, and Bess laughed, now soft, but regular, as she called him back. Boone stopped short when he saw her kneeling at the edge of the field, hands dirty, lips moving as she counted the seeds. He set the plowshare down and wiped his brow with his sleeve. "I can take the north row if you want the shade," he said, nodding toward the cottonwoods. Zadie shook her head. "I've worked in worse." He came closer, voice low. "I asked around in town. There's a man who sells window glass. I was thinking if you wanted, maybe we could fix the panes in the back room, make it into a space for her carving." Zadie looked over to where Bess was placing a handful of corn kernels into the earth. "She's been using the hearthlight." "I know, but she shouldn't have to." Zadie leaned on the hoe. "You already gave her a bench and a dog." "That was just a start." She studied him a moment, then turned back to her work. "We'll need boards for framing. I'll take the wagon tomorrow." That evening they sat out by the cook fire. The sun had gone down, but the heat still clung to the ground. Bess dozed on a wool blanket, Dust curled against her side. Boone handed Zadie a cup of coffee, black and bitter, just the way she liked it. She sipped, then glanced up at him. "You ever think you'd raise someone else's child?" He looked toward the girl. "I never thought I'd raise any. But I want her to know she can count on me." Zadie turned the cup in her hands. "Trust takes time." "I'll wait as long as it takes." She set the cup down and looked straight at him. "You're not waiting anymore." Boone's face changed then, not with surprise, but with something steadier, deeper. "I know." He moved closer but didn't reach for her. "When I left Rawlins, I thought I was just leaving behind what I'd lost. I didn't expect to find anything worth staying for." "You didn't find it," she said. "You built it." She stood, brushed the dust from her skirt, and walked toward the cabin. At the door she paused. "You coming?" He rose and followed, quiet as the earth beneath him. Inside, the lamp burned low. Boone stood just inside the door, his hat in his hands. Zadie turned to face him, her voice quieter now. "There's an extra quilt in the chest. You'll be cold if you stay on the porch." "I wasn't planning to sleep," he said softly. She stepped forward and took his hand. "You'll still need the quilt." He nodded. And for a long moment they stood in the golden hush of that room, the world outside fallen away. Later, as the fire burned low and the night settled around the cabin like a second skin, Zadie lay beside him, her hand resting over his heart. "You're not him," she whispered. "No," Boone said. "I'm not." Outside, Bess stirred in her sleep, her hand still curled in Dust's fur. The wind moved through the trees, slow and warm, and the cabin held steady in the dark. The next morning there was no need for words. Boone rose early and hitched the wagon. Zadie packed bread and cheese without him asking. Bess handed him a folded scrap of paper with a sketch of the window she wanted. As he took the reins, Boone looked at both of them. "I'll be back before sundown." Zadie nodded. "I know." And she did. The window panes arrived bundled in burlap, still warm from the glazier's hands. Boone laid them across the table with care, checking each for scratches as Zadie boiled water for laundry. Bess stood at the threshold, Dust at her side, watching without speaking. "I'll need to square the frame again before I set them," Boone said, brushing a thumb along the edge of the largest pane. "There's a little bow in the sill." Zadie didn't turn from the stove. "It's been like that since the spring rains 2 years back." The wall settled wrong. "I can brace it from underneath if I pull the floorboard near the chimney." She stirred the pot and nodded. "That'll hold." Bess slipped inside and crouched beside the bench, carving knife in hand. Boone set the pane back down and crossed to her. "You drawing something new?" She glanced up at him, then back to her wood. "A tree." He crouched beside her. "What kind?" "Cottonwood, like the one where Mama buries the egg shells." Boone glanced toward the window. "That's a good tree." "Grows stubborn." Zadie didn't speak, but her eyes lingered on both of them before she turned back to her work. The next 3 days passed with rhythm. Boone braced the floor, rebuilt the sill, and fitted the panes into place with steady, quiet hands. Bess carved in the light until the sun dipped past the ridge. Zadie moved through it all with a steadiness she hadn't known she could still feel. That night, Boone stood by the new window, watching the moonlight spill clean over the table. Zadie dried a plate and leaned beside him, her shoulder brushing his. She's been sleeping with that carving of the tree tucked beside her cot. Boone didn't take his eyes from the glass. "She's starting to believe in things again. She trusts you." He turned to her. "Do you?" Zadie folded the dishcloth slowly. "I wouldn't have let you stay if I didn't." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him then. "Yes, I do." He drew in a breath, slow and deep. "I've worked land, I've gone without, I know what staying costs, but I want to pay it. For both of you." Zadie reached up, touched the line of his jaw, rough from the day. "You already have." He leaned into her hand. "When I think about the years ahead, I see this place. I see her growing strong. I see you beside me." Zadie's voice was no more than a breath. "Then stay. Not just in the barn, not just for the season." Boone took her hand in his, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "I wasn't ever leaving." In the weeks that followed, he built a lean-to behind the cabin for tools and a second cot for Bess in the larger room. Zadie planted squash, and the vines took to the soil fast. Dust grew into his paws and learned to bark at hawks. Bess carved a frame for the new window, with a small pattern of leaves along the edges. One morning, as the sun spilled through the glass, Boone handed Zadie a narrow band of braided rawhide. "From the reins I used in Rawlins. I don't have much else to offer, but I want to marry you." Zadie looked down at it, then up at him. You think I need offering. I think you deserve it. She took the band, tied it around her wrist. Then yes, they were married by the circuit preacher who passed through in June. No one from town came, but the trader's wife sent wildflowers and the neighbor girl brought a basket of apples. Bess wore the dress Zadie had sewn from an old curtain, and she stood beside them as Boone said his vows with a voice steady as river rock. That night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were done, Boone lifted Zadie's hand to his chest and held it there. "Feels like I've been walking toward this place my whole life," he said. Zadie leaned her forehead to his. "Feels like I've finally come home." They lay together with the window open, the sound of frogs rising from the creek, Boone's arm around her waist, Zadie's breath slow and sure. In the other room, Bess slept with dust curled beneath the cot, and the carving of the cottonwood tree beside her. The land stayed quiet through summer. The beans grew tall, the squash thick around their roots. Boone fenced the eastern edge of the pasture and started a smokehouse by hand. Zadie took to writing letters again, slow and careful, sending one back east to her sister, who hadn't heard from her in nearly 3 years. Bess carved a new tree. This one had 3 figures beneath it. They hung it by the door.